So welcome to Artcasters. This is the show where we talk about the ins and outs of cartooning, illustration, and like to get into the weeds of the industry and stuff like that. And we every week have a rotating third guest, and this week's guest is really cool. A good acquaintance of mine from Portland. And we'll be excited to announce. But as usual, before getting into that, we'll just make a round and tell everybody where to find us. So you're on my channel, you know where to find me. And if you haven't yet, just hit subscribe and hit the little bell, and it'll give you notifications before we go live. And other than that, you can find my work at quarterlystories.com. Scott, where can everybody find your work? And also, if they're interested in comic book assets, where can they purchase really cool, trendy pack that's like blowing up on cuts?
So you can find me, as far as YouTube, you can find me at Circworks on YouTube or circworks.com, SERKWORKS. And and this is it sounds sales pitchy, but it's the honest to God truth. For one day left of my product, the Comic Maker Toolkit, which is a digital pack for just complete with everything you need to make comics, is for sale for $17 on Design Cuts. If you just type in Design Cut, it's trending, so it's like the number 1 or number 2 kind of fluctuating product on there right now. So you'll find it'll be right at the top, at least if you check it in the next day or two. But like I said, for the next day, it's on sale. After that, it's going to bump back up to $39. So you and I know a lot of people have already told me that they purchased it. I think Robert's in the chat. I think Robert got a copy. I'm trying to remember who else, but a lot of people have told me they got it and they're digging it. So yeah, just I thought we had a little banner, but it's just Design Cuts. Go there and you'll see it.
Awesome. And our next guest we've had on before, it's a returning guest. It's David Chelsea. You probably know his work he's really well known for just being one of the best 24-hour comic cartoonists around. He's achieved a lot in the 24-hour comics challenge to the point where they even made a documentary about him. He's written 2 extensive, super important books on perspective. Two of those books that I would actually have as required reading when I used to teach illustration classes. And he also wrote one of my favorite autobio comics that actually was one of the lucrative, important books that got me into doing autobio comics, called David Chelsea in Love. And he's written multiple other books. He's worked for Dark Horse. He's done storyboards for multiple giant clients. And we're honored to have him. So with that over introduction, David, where can everybody find your work?
Okay, well, I've got a website, dchelsea.com. Also put up stuff nearly every day on Patreon, and that's a huge long link. If people know how to find Patreon, they can search for me, and I put up a lot of stuff, and I have a lot of books. You go to an Amazon page, I think I have had 8 books published. The latest one was Perspective in Action. It's actually my 3rd perspective book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I've had 2 collections of 24-hour comics from Dark Horse and multiple other things, including that autobiographical comic.
I'm always stuck on that one because that's the initial comic that turned me on to your work. And I'm still super geeked out by it just because it had such an impact, Welcome to the Zone is also worth checking out.
Oh yeah.
And the refreshed pages are beautiful. So
thank you very much.
Patreon. All right, so let's get into the topic. So we are by no means, and I don't mean all 3 of us, I just mean Scott and I are no experts on perspective. And one thing that I did notice was just learning basic 2-point and 3-point perspective, and then worm's eye view, bird's eye view, learning those devices has just really helped my own work. and yet I never get it perfect. And one thing that and then Scott, you mentioned before we started recording, used to work for an architectural firm.
Yeah, here I'll show you this.
Yeah,
this is old school. So this is how we used to do perspective, and I've got tons of these, but I don't know if you can see that.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So that's just one view, but we have tons of other ones. I saved them because I use them for comics and stuff too. I did until I discovered Clip Studio, which has these awesome perspective tools, and everything snaps to it, and it's just amazing. So that's what I use now. But I also did a lot of isometric perspective because I used to do do video games. So
interesting.
That's it's a little easier once you get the hang of it. But yeah, I mean, it's always a struggle. I still struggle with it, even though I've done it tons, but
yeah,
you have a knack for explaining it. And and I'm also, let everyone know that I'm reading. This is, I think, David's first book. Is this your first book?
Well, that's my first perspective book. Yes.
First perspective book. So yeah, I've been reading this, and I mean, it's real. It just makes it very simple to understand and everything. So I put a link. It's on. I mean, it looks like it's coming from Josh, because if I comment in the chat right now, it comes from Josh. But yeah, click on that, and you can get this book, and you can also check out the other books in that. There's a link in the chat for that.
Yeah. So we thought, with our struggles in perspective, that we'd love to have you on Talk Perspective, and you very kindly offered to kind of show us a demo of you doing it. So,
yeah.
What exactly are we going to be watching and learning? I'm excited about this, honestly, because I always can use brushing up on perspective.
Well, let me tell you. Hang on. Let me
also here, there was a comment here. Okay. So Robert Johnson says to David, because I don't think David can see the chat. So
yeah,
saw you in the video on Hulu 24-hour Comic Day. You were in it, right, David?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, he was I think that one of the main figures in that documentary, and his assistant, who's a super nice guy, is in it as well. So it's really well made.
Curvilinear perspective is always out of my reach. Yeah, I don't know if we'll get that advanced today in the demo. But yeah,
I don't plan to.
Here's the thing. I think we're going to do a small dip into the pool, but just so you guys are aware of, one of the things that blew me away, just being in David's studio a couple years back, was seeing these globes. He's one of a few people who can actually do perfect perspective on a globe, and that's kind of insane. But when David, whenever you've tried to break that down for me, my brain kind of follows, and that's where that quantum physics thing happens, where I'm just I got this far, and then So I think we're going to do a small dip into the pool of perspective, although I think David's fully capable to deep dive later on. And you guys should check out his channel too, where he does a lot more deep dives into this stuff. So, and that's in the chats too. So okay. So what are you going to show us?
Okay. I wanted to start by showing. Are you watching?
Click on that, Josh, or do you want me to?
Oh, you go ahead.
I think.
Okay, so this is what I've been doing lately on my Patreon page. Is I've been doing comics drawn over perspective grids. So an entire page of comics with one underlying perspective grid, and this is just one. And this comes from the bonus disc that's on my second perspective book, Extreme Perspective. There's a whole disc of these computer-generated perspective grids that I was hoping would be a great boon to artists, although I don't hear that much from artists who use them. So I kind of want to encourage that. So here's just a kind of a splash page, and I drew it very, very, very quickly. But you can see that I use those underlying lines as a guide for the cityscape behind the figures. And here it is with the perspective grid removed. So, it's very quick and dirty, but it basically follows the lines of correct perspective. And really, that's as simple as it gets. And what I would also like to show you is not that. Here's a time-lapse video of me drawing this. So I'm just going to play this.
Are you going to narrate it while it's going? Because I know it's usually just music, right?
No, it's too quick.
That's too quick. Okay.
I do love the intro. Was that After Effects?
Yeah, that's After Effects.
Oh, it's really nicely done. So we also often have a guest, and I do another show with this guy Corey Kerr, who's a master at After Effects, and I think he'd appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Corey says he uses the disc.
So when you built these underlying grids, what computer programs do you use to build them?
Lightwave.
Lightwave?
Yeah. So I just built this kind of cubic lattice and multiplied it with mirrors and just took renderings, from a virtual camera pointing in all directions, and that's how I got the different angles of perspective.
Huh.
And I can't remember what angle this is. It looks like a 2-point. No, it looks like a 3-point view, a symmetrical one. But I couldn't tell you the precise degrees that we're looking at it.
So David, what's the purpose of the way the grid's laid out? How it's kind of sectioned off instead of just sort of your standard grid?
Oh, well, it's sectioned off because those are equal measurements.
Okay.
So all those squares, I mean, they can be anything you like. They could be 1 foot or they could be 1 meter. But they're all equal. And I think each section is 10 squares high, 2 squares wide.
Yeah, one of my biggest problems with perspective is placing people in there. And I know like the average person, 6 feet high, so you can kind of figure that out a little bit. But I mean, when you got floating objects like babies.
I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
And their distance is kind of arbitrary.
Yeah.
I kind of like the floating babies, though. It feels like a big Windsor McKay shout out,
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of.
That's
the other issue. The other problem I have sometimes is like just paying close attention to making sure your doorway is big enough for a person to get through, or your windows, or I mean that's always something you gotta
Well,
pay
yeah, and that's why it's useful to have the space gridded up.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I can see. I think, if you're doing like a room without a grid and you're trying to draw it in perspective, or a whole cityscape without a grid, I can definitely see where that could lead to a lot of issues.
Yeah. And Robert has a good point here where he says I place boxes in there, people in boxes starting with the shoulders. Yeah, I mean I usually box people in too, just to kind of get an idea, where they are in perspective, because it's hard to draw, especially like you're like a bird's eye view looking down at a person, to have the person in perspective and everything. That's challenging as well, but.
I fear
David
looking at some of my panels, because I've seen your correction pages and I've been like, Oh man, like there's been occasional panels where I'm like, if David sees this, like,
And the other thing that I always hated was chairs, because when I used to work for the architectural firm, we did a lot of food courts, so it was just chairs and chairs. I mean, man, and those are difficult to draw. I mean,
so I wanted to show you one more. You were talking about human figures.
Yes.
I have a problem with reference books. Do you use reference books? I mean, books of human figures? Because there's a lot of them, and they're kind of useful. But the problem I have with them is that they always have white backgrounds. So it's good reference for copying the figure, but it doesn't help you place the figure in a scene.
Yeah.
So this is an After Effects video. Let me see if I can get it going here. Hello, is it correct? Maybe I need to refresh. There we go. Okay, hang on. Needs to launch here. Oh, that's weird. I went someplace else.
Magic spray paint art.
Okay. Let's go.
That's next week's show.
I actually want to show you. There we go. Okay, so this is... And once again, this is After Effects.
I kind of like. I'm very impressed with how, like, one of the things I love about perspective. I mean, at this point, it's getting complicated, but what I love is how there's a simple solution to what can be kind of overwhelming at first, and so it seems like I don't know. A lot of it's just thinking about the shapes in space.
So I have a question, David. Are you eyeballing the distance as we move forward in space, how obviously not the horizon lines, but the horizontal lines get further apart because you're,
I've made an educated guess. Okay. So like I say, the figure is mostly in a blank background. But I'm turning this down. This is very noisy. The figure is mostly in a blank background, but because she's sitting on a circular turntable, I know that can fit into a square.
Right.
So I make an educated guess about where the horizon is, draw vanishing points back, and enclose the circle in a square, and that gives me the basis for squaring up the rest of the space. If you can understand it. So that one circular element, I know has equal divisions, can be enclosed in a square, and basically a square on the ground can be the basis for an entire perspective scene.
That's incredible.
Thank you. So I've been doing a series of these. This is one of the things that you can see on Patreon. I gave your viewers a free look, but it's actually behind a paywall. But that time lapse one was free.
Nice. So you guys should definitely check out David's Patreon to get like these little clues that are going to help out with your comics.
Yeah.
your
So
illustration.
I've done a few of them. I've done a sort of a simple setup of 1-point perspective, a simple setup of 2-point perspective, simple setup of 3-point perspective, how to draw a hexagonal tile floor. The one that's going up tomorrow is just how to draw a perspective circle inside a square.
Got it. So, really quick question on perspectives. So, let's say you have an editorial like due tomorrow. Do you eyeball often, or have you because of like the process of writing these books and whatnot become like to the point where you don't want to eyeball? Um,
Well, it depends. I mean, actually, in a lot of illustrations, it doesn't even come up. As far perspective.
yeah.
And when it does, sometimes I can just copy perspective off the reference. If I've got photo reference, and I can extend the perspective in the picture to add things that would be in keeping with the rest of the image. Or I might actually use one of my own perspective grids.
Nice. That's awesome. So what do you think are the most common errors that people make with perspective? Like when it comes to like a newer cartoonist or even an older, like a veteran cartoonist, what are like some really common perspective mistakes that you see?
Well, it's really common for people to draw the human figures larger than the space they inhabit. I mean, when you were talking about what size to make the door, that's a common problem. It's also really common, maybe not so much in cartooning, but in realistic illustration, where you're taking two pieces of reference that are incompatible and combining them. Like you might be looking down on a room, but there's a window, and the window has a scene in it that's seen from head on. You see that a lot.
Yeah, I definitely have seen that, where it's like it's clearly like the ground and horizon has shifted like outside of the window.
Yeah, and it's also very common to see just even in a 1-point perspective that the lines don't recede to the same point.
Yeah.
Some of them do, some of them don't. They're all over the place. Somebody was showing me on Facebook. Somebody posted a picture of Trump, and he was in this sort of cathedral-like space. He was sitting, unveiling a painting, and the rug on the floor didn't go to the same place as the lines on the wall, and somebody had actually drawn lines on it, and then called me out. Like he said, "Hey, look at this, David Chelsea." So I guess I have a reputation for this.
I think so. Like I said, those correction posts you put up made me feel like I need to cross-check.
Oh yeah,
perspectives.
I haven't done that. That was I did that on my website for a while. It's called my title for it was Perspective Police, and they were a lot of work. I haven't done one of those in a long time.
Yeah,
but I'm always seeing potential stuff that would be fun to do.
Yeah, what's up with the perspective in like The Last Supper? Have you ever looked at that?
The perspective in the Last Supper is perfectly consistent. The problem with it is that it was mounted way up high. So so it doesn't match where it's placed in the room. But that makes sense because you wouldn't want to be looking up at the table and Jesus, you wouldn't even be able to see the top of the table. So the idea of placing a picture in a room in such a way that it could actually fool the eye. That got abandoned very, very early in the Renaissance.
Yeah, and I feel like there was a brief trend where there were these kind of forced perspectives in the Renaissance that did some really, really, really kind of weird, sometimes kind of beautifully awful perspectives, but yeah. So why have you dedicated so much of your work and fascination with perspective, and why do you think it's super important for people to use?
Well, I just went nuts for it when I was in my 20s, and what kind of clinched it is that I got a contract to do a book about it. And truth to tell, it's the only book of mine that's ever brought in any royalties, which is why I've done more of them.
Yeah.
And it's also it's funny. Most of the responses I get, like most of the unsolicited mail I get, is from people asking me perspective questions. Like, every once in a blue moon, someone will, say something nice about David Chelsea in Love. But it seems like my most dedicated fans are perspective geeks. So that's kind of kept me doing it because, I get something back.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that makes me happy that like the perspective, because you're incredibly good at breaking it down. And at the same time, as an indie cartoonist, makes me a little sad because I feel like you've made some really strong work that should be equally, if not more, known.
Well, I have,
by the way, the perspective is strong too. But
it's made for a very weird career because the people who liked David Chelsea in Love generally like the 24-hour comic stuff that I do for Dark Horse.
Yeah.
But they generally pay no attention at all to the perspective stuff, and vice versa. So I basically have two publics that that have very little overlap. And the people that I consider my natural colleagues or my natural peers, which are the indie, the auto-bio slice of life people, generally they pay no attention at all to perspective in their work. They're very self-trained, and and the artists who I think I've influenced tend to be either superhero pencilers or aspiring to be so, which is like not a genre I pay any attention to.
Yeah, that's fascinating though, because you have an influence on it. That is interesting. It's to me that's one of the most interesting things about the indie comic world is that I find that there's a lot of weird overlap between mainstream and indie. But I do find it like, I don't know, I find it interesting, the idea of like, I don't know, like subversively you're getting into mainstream. But by doing that, I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that's cool, because I think it's cool if like, first off, like the books are really helpful and really good. Like I said, particularly the first perspective book, because it's such just a good introduction. I would have a lot of my early illustration students when I was teaching college, like look through it just to kind of learn basic perspective, and then you'd see their like illustrations go from like buyable to like really professional looking, because they're taking the time to kind of make the background look good.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and it to me it's like I've never perfected perspective, but I do remember like when I was trying to do indie comics initially, just being really frustrated with the results and realizing that it was mostly because I was drawing a lot of floating heads with, dark backgrounds or just cheating my backgrounds. And just adding backgrounds and spending time on backgrounds really pulls people into the world. So it's almost like if you were making an indie film, like bothering to have a set kind of helps. Having set design,
I mean, a lot of people grow up on they grow up on comic strips, or they grow up on TV animation, and especially the kind of limited animation that I grew up watching, like the Hanna-Barbera stuff. It really is figures and backgrounds, and you almost never see feet. So it's very possible to grow up and become an artist and maybe never even draw feet, and just think, getting that head maybe cut off at the shoulders, and getting a plausible looking landscape behind it. That's cartooning. And you look at somebody like Winsor McKay, or you look at like anybody who drew for the New Yorker in the 1930s. They're thinking three-dimensionally. I mean, they're putting people in rooms, and so it's not background, it's environment.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And that's really exciting to me. People don't just they're not just photographic models, posing in front of green screens. They're actually characters in environments.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And the environment can say so much about the character too. So I think it's just like another important like sentence you can add to a story, I guess it's like missing a bunch of adjectives and then trying to write a really compelling story. Just adding some really good adjectives can like really spice up a story and give context to it and give so much to it. Like thinking about it, that's actually something where like Welcome to the Zone, like to me has these really exquisite backgrounds, and real like environments that kind of there's a lot of humor in it, and the environments themselves kind of add to like the humor, and then also to like kind of some, I'd say, dark humor. but like they sort of add so much to the whole kind of feel of it. And I think that, like I said, that's a vocabulary. I think it's cool that you're kind of putting these books out and kind of helping, I think, cartoonists and illustrators like access, yeah. So with you were talking about the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, right? Do you ever delve in doing just like cartoon modern and just being like, forget just like being like, I know the vanishing point goes this way, but I'm going to skew it this way because design. Like, you ever kind of do that just for fun?
No. I mean, I do a lot of drawings where I'm just drawing figures with no background, whatever. I like, I have a sense of occasion if there's anything that someone's gonna see. So I'll try and make an effort to get it right. I mean, I guess you could say I do like rough sketches for illustration jobs, and then I won't trouble myself too much about getting the perspective correct.
Yeah,
I figure there's time enough for the finish.
Yeah.
Have you? I was going to say, have you ever had a point where you've cheated perspective because the proper perspective just didn't look right? I know I've ran into situations like that where either created a tangent or something, like back when I was doing video games and the isometric perspective. There sometimes there were just certain angles that they just didn't look right, even though that they were drawn correctly. Do you ever run into that?
Well, you can always move stuff around. Yeah, I mean, if you, uh, the bar gets higher if you're including floors, if you're including figures that are standing on floors. Um, and there have been cases, like when I was doing illustration, where the client actually, or the art director actually asked me to make a figure too big for the space because they wanted him bigger in the frame than he would have been. It's when it's late at night and you don't have time to work it all out correctly. Yes, everybody cheats.
Right.
I think what you were talking about with roughs, though, and I think this ties into the grids you're showing, is I think like a big secret to kind of making excellent finished illustrations is like I think there's a lot of like young cartoonists or like early artists will just kind of jump in and try to finish. I even remember when I was starting before going into art school, I would do these drawings. And I always started, like, if I were drawing a person, I would start with, like, the eye. And I would just draw, like, a perfect eye and then work out from there. And then I'd always end up with these characters, who had, like, and I see it all the time with young artists, but they have, like, their eyes are not, like, they're offset, which is kind of creepy looking.
Well, do you draw, like, from live figures? Like,
yeah, all the time now. Yeah.
Okay. I've lately been spending a lot of time. I don't go to the drawing studio anymore. It's just like too much of a commitment. But there's this YouTube channel called Croquis Cafe, where they'll do like a standard model session. Like they'll have a model posing for, 5 1-minute poses and 4 2-minute poses and a 5-minute pose. And so I'll just, draw that to keep in shape. And I, as long as I've been at it, always the first thing I draw is too small. Usually it's like a hand or something, or one arm. And, I'll draw the thing and I'll get to the end and I realize, oh, damn. Like the proportions are right for all of it except that first hand.
Yeah. I think it's kind of tying into what we're talking about with the grids and stuff like that. Because like the trick, like with the eye, the big trick is, you just do that through line and then you're not going to mess up the eyes. Like, and then there's other tricks that as you get further and further, like with life drawing, one of my favorites is actually to look at, like, especially on a face, to look at the bridge of the nose, like where it actually connects, not the cartilage, but I remember that being like this unlocked thing where I was like, oh, this thing, the angle of that lets you know that like this is at so much of an angle, so it should be so much shorter for the eye over here than it is over here. And just like that comparative practice, that once again, it's very, very much like what you showed with the perspective video, where it's like at first you're seeing this model, it's hard to imagine the space that this person on a white field is in. And then sometimes just breaking it down to like its simplest at the beginning can really make like the what seems overwhelming and unachievable achievable. I do the same thing with the small point, but what's great about that first messed up hand is you can always erase it. Or like one challenge I like doing now with life drawing too is just to do it in pen, because it makes me less precious. So like when I use a pencil, I feel like I can always erase. And so I'm less observant and less quick and less committed. Whereas if I use just ink and I just go direct to the page, then I can just draw over that like tiny hand, the right hand. And it ends up working well,
I'm going to do my next 24-hour comic in ink. I'm going to do it directly in ink. I haven't found a good cause yet. But what I really want to do is I want to do, like a Run for the Arts thing. I've done it a couple of times before. But I want to raise money per page and then shock everybody, because I can draw so much faster if I'm not penciling beforehand. that I can probably draw 4 times as many. Like I could probably draw 4 pages in an hour.
Unbelievable. I think you could easily. It's a scary prospect though, because like for me with life drawing, I always just it feels like fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then
well, it's sexy. Actually, I've noticed that I draw male models and female models that I don't find attractive much better. I mean, if the female model is attractive, I find the beauty distracting, and I draw too slowly in order to get it right.
yeah.
So I see a question from Corey Kerr.
Yeah.
How much did I model my friend Mug off of real people? I kind of actually had a friend of mine in mind for Mug, or an actor I know. I always imagine Mug speaking in his voice, and he's a little bit taller than me, and I was always careful to make Mug just a little bit taller than me in the panels. But he doesn't have a cup-shaped head.
I would hope not.
That's an exaggeration.
So when is the next 24-hour comic day? What day do they do that?
It's the first Saturday in October.
October, okay. Man, a lot of art.
And I was thinking of actually doing one over the summer, but I got too busy with some other work. So I'm going to try and keep that first Saturday in October open.
Yeah,
but I have to find a good cause to try and raise money for. Last time it was the Democratic Congressional Committee, because it was the 2018 election.
Might be I don't know. I wonder. Well, will the timing work out for this one?
Yeah, I haven't. Well, I mean, I guess I could raise money for a candidate. I haven't really picked a candidate in the presidential election yet.
Oh, we can talk about that. I have a guy.
Well, yeah, if you got a pet one, you can make your best case. Is it Kristen Gillibrand? She just dropped out.
No, but it is a long shot. I like him a lot. I'm a big
Andrew Yang. Come on.
I have a math hat. I thought it was funny. But I like him. So we'll see. I don't think he'll last.
Okay.
Yeah. But he's lasted longer than I thought he would, which is kind of cool. So, yang gang. Anyhow, so with the 24-hour comic, like I've done it twice. Both times, I think I psyched myself out.
How did you psych yourself out?
So like there's this thing that happens, like I play music too, and there's this thing that happens when you're performing live. I know you do acting occasionally too. And so like it's a stage performance thing where it's like if you start thinking about forgetting a line and then you kind of think about it too much, you like forget the line. It feels like that, where it's like kind of like when I've played shows where I've thought too much about the guitar that I'm playing and like messing up to where I actually mess up because I'm thinking about it too much, like about getting it right. I have that exact thing happen the second I go into a 24-hour comic. I come in way too precious and like expecting, I think, too much. And
well, that's a very common problem, is that you bite off more than you can chew. Like I could. Like, if perspective is giving you trouble, I would suggest just doing a comic with entirely blank backgrounds. It works for Jules Pfeiffer.
That's a good point. And like for the 24-hour comic, what you're able to achieve though definitely raises the bar a little bit. You know. The
other thing is just tell all your stories out in nature where there's no buildings or anything like that. That can make it a little easier too.
Crazy at that business.
There's a great book called Perspective in Perspective by a writer named Lawrence Wright, and he has a chapter on perspective in nature, which is, it exists, it's subtle. What you don't have is you don't have those linear cues that you do in the human environment, but you do have to think about how things get smaller as they get further away. and you do have true verticals in trees, or or approximate verticals, but no straight lines on the ground. So you can fake a lot.
I love it. So I need to try to do a 24-hour comic with trees, I think. That's what I need to do. But I do think if I went in and just had more fun with it, I'd do a lot better. I'm just such a and I think this is a common thing with illustrators. It's like I think I tend to be so project oriented. And tend to like map things out, and I like pre-planning and stuff. So like the idea of it just fills me with dread.
Well,
which is weird. I had a blast. Like, we did a 24-hour comic with you for it was like a benefit. And
was that the S. Clay Wilson benefit?
Yeah. And
what did you draw for that?
I got like 12 pages in, and it was like a autobiographical story that I still want to tell. It was a nice, like, kind of early map, but I just was being too noodly with it, and like spending way too much time with it. But I did have fun. I had a lot of fun, and the camaraderie that kind of happens is pretty fun. Like seeing who sticks it through,
So David, do you want to, just for anyone who doesn't know, and I'm definitely familiar with 24-hour comic, but I was just kind of curious, like what the actual rules are. Obviously, you have to do it 24 hours, but how many pages does it have to be? What are some of the rules?
It does. Okay, well, it can be as many pages as you want it to be. And the way Scott McCloud set it up, he wanted to draw a page an hour. Which is entirely doable, but people have drawn for 24 hours and come up with 10 pages. Actually, the first and only time I tried to do it digitally, that was a case where I bit off more than I could chew, and I could only finish 17 pages in 24 hours. But it's just keep drawing, draw as many pages as you can manage.
Yeah.
And it helps to have a flexible premise. I've done so many of them. I've made a lot of mistakes. One mistake I've made more than once is coming in with a very definite idea, a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And what happened was, in all those cases, I was so scared of falling behind and not being able to fit my story into 24 pages that I told the story in a very economical way and ran out of story like at page 15 or something and had to vamp for 10 pages.
Oh man. I can relate to that.
It's really hard to time it right. But it's easier to time it right if you have a very loose premise that that doesn't suggest a tight plot. Like the first one where I had a guy climbing a building. I knew that he had to get to the top of the building by page 24, but there wasn't a set number of floors he had to cover, so I could keep him climbing as long as I needed to.
That's smart. So like kind of a flexible premise is pretty good advice, I think.
Yeah, a guy goes on a car trip, or I had one where a character had insomnia and he was just wandering around, being insomniac and running into stuff, and eventually he woke up, or eventually he fell back to sleep.
I love it. So with the 24-hour comic too, when you go in, then you do have a premise though before you start?
Yeah, well, you have to have something. Actually, I might just start drawing, the next time I might just start drawing with the premise that I'm going to draw 4 pages an hour, and I'm just going to free associate, and I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll take suggestions. But usually I'll have, at least a glimmer of a premise.
That's awesome.
So something that would make more sense, kind of what you're talking about before, as far as not having a clear beginning, middle, and end. So if you just had like a slugfest between two people, and then maybe there's some dialogue, banter back and forth, and all that kind of stuff, but then you can kind of end it when you need to end it, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so that's kind of something like that. So I'm not even necessarily talking about superheroes, and I know you're not.
Mm-hmm.
A fan of that.
Yeah, you can have a barroom brawl is a great place to start, because they can just keep punching and punching, and other people can start fighting, and maybe the cops come, and there's all sorts of places you can go. There's no particular reason to end it, or any particular place. I suppose somebody dies, you might have to end it.
I love it. So like the way you approach long form comics versus like a 24-hour comic, I'd imagine is significantly different. Like for instance, when you're working on a long form story, how much like kind of pre-mapping and planning do you do? Because like,
I do. Yeah, do a lot.
Welcome to the Throne seems pretty free. Like there's plot, but it seems kind of loose in a good way. But I'm wondering if it was designed that way, and it's just my desire to meet a cartoonist who doesn't have a hard time doing what they do.
It may seem looser than it was. I mean, I wrote the whole thing out, as a. I wrote the whole thing out in rough form.
Yeah.
And pretty much followed the story as I'd written it out. I made a couple of changes, but it was very close to what was in the first draft.
Nice.
But I did not start it. I didn't start the story with the ending unwritten, and I haven't done that in a while.
Yeah, I made the mistake once, and I ended up with a graphic novel I can't do anything with.
I mean, that's a fine way to approach 24-hour comics, but if you're going to be spending a year on something, then you would kind of want to have a destination in mind. Yeah.
I think very, very similar to those grids for the perspective. It helps to have that guide, because otherwise you can end up like with a line that's just not working, and wonder why, and be missing that kind of that.
Yeah. If you're doing a serialized strip, I guess I think even people who do, I don't know, Prince Valiant or something, they have story arcs mapped out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they have it broken down week to week what's going to happen, but there's a lot of planning that goes into that.
Yeah, that
just like doing series television. You wouldn't start a season. Actually, I think they did start the last season of Breaking Bad without having the final script written. That's amazing.
That scares me, and I can't believe that. Like that was so. I don't know. I think it was such a well-crafted show, and without a lot of waste for a TV show. It doesn't have a lot of waste. So if they were improvising that's insane.
And one of the few series that actually ended. I mean, most people were happy with the ending. I mean, that doesn't happen. I mean, with just look at all the blowback that like Game of Thrones got. So I mean, it usually it's really hard to wrap up a series.
People remember when you don't stick the landing.
Yeah.
That's a fair point. If you want to be remembered, don't stick the landing. I'm just kidding. I'm intentionally taking the wrong message from that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, are you a Lost Sopranos? I think that the ending of Sopranos was a total fizzle, but there are people who like it. There are people who like Yoko Ono's music too.
Yeah, I would say that's a apt comparison.
I think Lost ended pretty disastrously.
Oh yeah,
I love that show too. I was like,
but I didn't mind the end of Seinfeld.
Yeah, but I think that's because the show, like, it seems like the themes of the show, like even Sopranos, didn't bug me as much as Lost, because the way Lost was structured was for a payoff. Like the writing style was like constant hooks for a payoff. Having no payoff after that many constant hooks is like probably, I think it might be an interesting premise for a good 24-hour comic, is to do a 24-hour comic that's just hooks, like the whole thing, and then just delivers the worst payoff, like on purpose. That could be funny. I don't know.
I haven't been daring enough to try this, but it would be fun to do a story where you start with the last page and you work backwards. I worked on a Jam comic once that was like that, where you were expected to add panels to in front of whatever somebody else had drawn.
Yeah.
I was in this crowd of really strange cartoonists who did Jam comics in their sketchbooks that would pass around for years and never get finished. And I don't think that one ever got begun.
Huh. That's kind of an interesting idea, though, like the working that way. That is fascinating. I'm curious. You'd have to try it with something like a Jam comic or a 24-hour. I wouldn't want to commit to trying that on a long form.
Working backwards?
Yeah.
Working backwards.
Oh, a long form. I mean, I thought you meant, yeah.
No. I mean, like a long form book, like that would be interesting. Yeah. But it also would be interesting because I feel like inevitably you kind of improve a bit as you go on in a book. And I think that would be really transparent. If instead of it gradually improving, it just goes backwards. Where it starts off like really polished and great, and then kind of like the characters weren't as worked out earlier on. So it just, as you're reading the story, you're like,
when you've done a 24-hour comic, do you notice that the drawing quality drop off as you get further along?
I didn't, but I think that's, I think my issue was trying to, like, I wasn't working in a style, or I was working too tight, and I don't think I was working in a style that was conducive for it. So, and I tried to maintain it consistently. And so I think like, were I to do it again, I would come in with a much looser style, and kind of approach it with a little bit less kind of like rigidness, which I think is kind of a byproduct of the cartooning thing for me, because it's like I like to rule out everything, and it's just, there's something really scary to me about just going wild, which is funny because, like I said, at a life drawing session, I don't feel anxiety. I enjoy it.
Yeah,
I used to early in life drawing before it kind of cracked, Yeah. But,
so, do you want to go to the demo? Because that's sort of what I had set up to do.
Yeah, that's what we'd like to see.
I'm anxious to see more.
Yeah. So I have prepared a perspective grid that I'm just going to draw over, and I didn't really have a premise, but my son suggested, since I did floating babies before, that I do floating old people. And I don't know.
You can have some canes and some walkers, kind of.
Yeah, maybe. I hope there's not too much of a lag here. Ooh. I might be I might be running really slow. Let's see
We're
how.
seeing it pretty good, I think.
Okay. Oh, I might be working too big. Maybe I'll bump the resolution down.
Yeah, it's all,
And now it comes to this. We're watching a blue bar go across the screen.
you know what this is? This is Lost. This is like but there will be a payoff, you guys. So like right now we're downloading the file from and we're waiting, and then there will be an explosion at the end.
Okay, I have a theory about Lost. Well, it's just an observation, which is that they really wanted to pull a Sixth Sense or a crying game. They really wanted to do a surprise ending.
Yeah, I think so.
And the problem with that is that the show was just too popular, and it was on. You know, they could have done it if they'd been doing the Netflix model,
Yeah.
where they dump all the episodes at once.
Yeah, don't give people time enough to figure it out or throw out every single possibility there is.
because it was up every week, and because there was this huge online community parsing it, their surprise ending had to be a blind side. So they couldn't drop any clues, and I mean that's the satisfaction of something like The Sixth Sense, is that at the end, you see all the clues you missed.
Yeah.
But and in Lost there weren't any clues you missed because they were scared, shitless that they would give the game away. So they didn't give the game away, but they didn't give you the satisfaction of seeing everything add up. It was just a complete blindside.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when you put so many threads out there and then you don't tie them and you come in with kind of a surprise, I think why The Sixth Sense works is there are little threads. It's like those like old Sherlock Holmes or like old mystery type stories, especially Agatha Christie, really good at that, where it's like there's a surprise ending, but when you think back, you're like, oh yeah, there was that thing, and then there was that other thing, and you can kind of add it and at least have some kind of passage there. I am fascinated seeing how you're applying these grids. I think that's really cool.
Wow. Okay, so I'm working at an extreme disadvantage because even though I've bumped it down,
got a lag.
Wow. Yeah. So I don't know what I'm doing. And I just maybe I have too many windows open. What I will do is close some of these.
So I feel like this is a window into professional life, because computer lags are just like part and parcel of the whole thing. I mean, where I work as an art director, it's like, I think, at least twice a day, one of my staff, one of my designers is frustrated because the computer's lagging. It's just kind of an unfortunate thing with those machines.
I don't usually have these problems, but it's just bad today.
Well, it's probably the stream.
Actually, I closed some windows. I think I'm doing a little better.
Yeah, that looks a little more responsive.
All right. And this will probably be quick. I usually do these on paper. Or have always done these on paper before, but I didn't want to set up a camera. So much easier to do screenshot. I haven't thought at all about what the background would be. Do you have any suggestions?
He looks like he's in a hospital garb, so maybe like a hospital setting. I don't know.
Yes, that could be good.
So I'm curious. Do you usually draw your figures first, and then do you follow all the way through with your buildings, or do you just or it's just hidden behind whatever the figure is? Like, would you draw the building perspective on a separate layer and then kind of race behind it, or?
Well, for these, I've been doing. For these, I've been doing just like one drawing session. So, because the figures are in front, kind of draw the background behind them.
Nice. And I'm guessing, is that also for like expediency? Because I mean, why draw the parts that are behind the figure?
Yeah. Now, for an actual page of published comics, I would probably draw the background first and maybe do figures on an upper layer. Which adds time. But I'm trying to do these quickly.
Got it. And in that case, do you do that mainly for like revisions? Like, so if they're like, hey, can you move that character a little bit? You can be like, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of it's almost like when you put in your word balloons. A lot of people will put the word balloons in, or maybe not a lot of people, but some people will put the word balloons before they do background, so they don't have to, or any of the drawing, so they can not have to do that much more work on the drawing. But then, say if you have to translate it, or they decide to shift something, then you're kind of in a tough spot.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Do you do it that way, Josh? Do you?
Yes. I mean, because I'm hand lettering, it's like what I've lettered is so married to what I am doing that if somebody had to translate it, they'd have a beast of a time going in and deleting one flat layer, basically. But I do like the fact that I feel like without having that like text there, it's like you do kind of spend a lot of time drawing things that won't be seen.
Yeah.
So it's like a give and take. It's like you kind of,
yeah.
So. Okay, I drew that line. I know it's going to show up eventually. Or maybe not.
I don't know why, but I'm getting like a Quentin Blake vibe.
Well, it's not my usual style. So maybe I'll draw. Okay. Let me think about this. It would be really hard to introduce a staircase. So maybe I'll just make it a corridor.
Yeah, just MCS shirt it. We've got the time, right?
Or I could make it a... No, it's...
I love the wheelchair as
Yeah,
an option.
that's
really
great.
uncooperative. And I don't know if it's I'm trying to draw faster than usual, but and I'm gonna bump that down.
So Robert in the chat said sometimes I take pics on my phone of close-up images and try to find the perspective of them as an exercise. That's pretty
Well,
good.
that's a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
Have you ever used Clip Studio Paint, David?
A little bit. I used it for a flatting job, and I liked the results. It's just you know, the learning curve is really steep.
Yeah, it took me a while, but have you used any of the perspective grids?
No, and I know that there are perspective grids in Illustrator, and I haven't worked with them. My suspicion is that that they don't maintain a consistent cone of vision as you move things around, but that may be wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Illustrator, but I've been using Clip Studio Paint for the perspective grids in there, and it almost feels like cheating because it's just like everything will snap to the perspective unless you don't want it to. You know, if you're doing an angle or something or something more organic. But
and you have a lot of flexibility. Do you have?
You can create your own grids. I mean, you can create your own perspective. I don't know if I could do a demo, but yeah, it's pretty impressive.
I'm so personally I'm so hedged to the Adobe programs and used to them and the shortcuts that just trying something other than that kind of freaks me out a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of fought it for a while. I remember going all the way back to when like Kevin was on the show and we were talking about how much we wanted to learn it, but you had to balance the learning curve versus getting stuff done, and eventually I just dove in, and I mean I can't even I don't even know like probably 10% of what that program can do, but I just kind of learn as I go, like what do I need to do right now, and then I just go find a tutorial that shows me how to do it. So but the perspective is just like it would be hard for me to go back to any other way of doing it. It's just pretty cool.
It's cool to watch this because I can see how useful that grid is, because you can kind of make almost any plane that's going to fit within that perspective. Seeing it in action, it's cool because I can see the advantage of having. It looks like it kind of allows a lot more freedom with what you're kind of executing, you know?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm finding it's going faster now that I've flattened it, which means it's going to be a little harder separating from the separating from the grid, but.
So I'm just gonna call out this here. Robert says try Infinity Photo and Designer. So Robert, I've been meaning to try those too, and I probably will get them because I know they have iPad versions, and I want some kind of vector program for iPad. But do they have perspective tools as well in Affinity?
I think Corey is trying to. I have a suspicion this might just be kind of a little bit of a smart ass, but let me put this up.
Yeah.
He was saying,
"Oh, AI
on a tile floor."
When he said AI perspective grids are garbage, I misread that. I thought he said all perspective grids are garbage. I'm like, what are you saying?
Yeah. But I do think this might have been a bit of a troll. That's kind of the first thing that came to mind, David, when you were asking, what do you want to see in perspective? I was just thinking, well, how about a bunch of cars, a crowd, and some horses? Just try to pick the hardest things. Oh, yeah. I love it.
There were some suggestions being thrown out, like the Matrix, and there's a watching scene.
This is becoming slightly Matrix-esque.
Yeah.
The angle, that was a big surprise.
Yeah. Now I'm seeing it. Yeah.
Well, see, now that I've got it rotated, I'm seeing all sorts of anatomy mistakes, not so much perspective mistakes. I mean,
that's why they always say you got to flip your screen, or but I guess rotating it does the same thing. It's so weird how we don't see that stuff until you flip things around.
Oh yeah. And what I was talking about earlier, that kind of early mistake a lot of artists make where they don't do a through line and the eyes are off, that literally will nail you every time you flip.
Yeah, I always draw through lines for the eyes and the nose, basically the X, rotate, kind of curving along the oval of the face always.
I do like I don't know. I do like the idea of flipping things.
Yeah, it's easy to do digitally. It used to be that I would work on vellum and flip it over multiple times, and of course it would get very grimy looking, where you couldn't read it. I think actually I read that Spiegelman worked on vellum, and he would work in successive colors, starting with light blue and working to red and purple and green, so you could use one piece of paper multiple times.
That makes sense, because I feel like I might have been at least at the place I went for illustration, I think I was the last class that was still learning the method with just multiple rounds of roughs on tracing paper. And then just overlaying, so you'd work out your background, and then you'd move the tracing paper to get your figure placed and stuff. And then at the end of that, because they had us working on illustration board, we'd transfer it from that to board. And it is interesting in a digital age, how quick a lot of that process is. It's fascinating because knowing what came before is but there is kind of a fun to paste up, and that style of having to work. I still kind of enjoy it. I still use a light box though, so I think I
use a light box from time to time, and I still like working on paper.
I do too.
there's not a lag when you're working on paper.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's something that feels wrong about finishing inking something and not having those like a couple fingers with black on them you have to wash off.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Something I might have mentioned this because I repeat myself a lot. So if I brought this up last time, you can stop me. But it seems to me that in the switch to digital, I'm not sure that it's even meaningful to think of a distinction between penciling and inking. I mean, for me, working digitally, inking is just the last stage of penciling.
Yeah, it's almost like just kind of tightening things up. I mean, I know when I work digitally, I sometimes it's just the texture of the brush, but it's more just to make me feel like I'm penciling, even though you can use an inking brush or whatever to pencil or whatever, and just kind of keep going over it and tightening it up. But I think I still try to mimic what I did traditionally, just because that's what I know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. To me, I don't know. It depends on the style I'm working in. Because if I'm working really cartoony, like super simplified, I do find that it's easier to pencil that kind of stuff digitally. But if I have to do like more realistic stuff, it usually that's stuff I want to do traditionally, which is kind of weird because I know other people like it the other way or just go all digital. But yeah. Corey was saying he hates AI perspective grids. They're hard to work with, and the cone of vision being intimate is a huge problem.
Intimate? What does that mean?
I don't know.
I have to ask Corey, I guess.
Yeah.
I might have I lost responsiveness entirely in Photoshop? I'm finding. Let's see. Can I get anything done here? Okay.
What's impressive to me is the speed with which you're drawing this. Considering that there's a lag, it's still pretty incredible. Oh, he meant to say infinite.
Infinite.
That makes sense.
Infinite cone of vision.
Yeah.
Maybe he means a really wide cone of vision. And a cone of vision is a concept that is not terribly well understood by a lot of people. It just means it's the area of a drawing in perspective where you have minimal distortion, and there are reasons because of just the geometry of how perspective is set up, where if you get outside of a narrow central area, you find a lot of distortion, and you see this in wide-angle photographs, and that's the whole thing that the anamorphosis is based on. If you ever see like sidewalk chalk drawings,
Got it.
A perspective drawing is basically designed to work only from one particular spot. Only from one particular spot will a drawing in perspective look like what you would see in your eye. And it's less of a problem, basically if you're taking a very narrow area. if you're taking as narrow an area as you might see through a telescope, there's practically no difference between a perspective drawing and what you see in your eye. And that's a cone of vision. And there's a way of calculating it. And the general rule is to stay within a 60-degree cone of vision. And one of these days I'm going to do an After Effects video where I explain, that whole concept and how you measure it out. So keep watching my Patreon page.
Yeah.
And let's see.
Robert was saying they do have isometric grid tools in Affinity. And
Okay, I don't see that.
yeah, and then he said if you did perspective grids manually in Photoshop using the shape tool, it looks like you can do the same thing in Affinity Photo.
Yeah, I've seen people make perspective grids in Photoshop using the I think it's the shape tool. Yeah, that's the one that's like you can make it a star and you give it a whole bunch of points and then you just pull two stars next, you pull them out and then they'll intersect, and that kind of creates the perspective grid in Photoshop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a perspective tool in Photoshop, and I use that a lot. It's not necessarily entirely accurate, but it's a good way of putting things into perspective without too much work. And I'm happy to find a nice digital dodge where I can take advantage of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think any shortcuts in this industry that you can come up with are pleasant to know.
Yeah. I mean, I would totally recommend the perspective grids in Clip Studio.
All right, Scott, you've got me sold. I'm gonna have to bug you for like a one-on-one on that.
Yeah. Well, when I'm doing my series on creating comics, but it'll be a while before I get to perspective. But I'll definitely show how I use those grids in Clip Studio.
So what genius came up with that name? I mean, Manga Studio was a perfectly serviceable name.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what it means, to be perfectly honest. I don't know. It sounds like a clip art thing.
Yeah, it sounds like a clip art or some kind of, maybe it's like an NRA site.
I just think clip joint.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, because it's a Japanese company that maybe that means something different in Japan translated to English or something. I don't know. But yeah, I don't like that name at all. Kick Manga Studio.
Yeah. Well, I could see that they maybe thought Manga Studio was limiting because they wanted a wider audience than people who just wanted to draw manga.
Yeah. I don't know if they translated it. I don't. There must have already been something called Comic Studio, I'm guessing. Because otherwise, I don't know why they wouldn't have done that.
But it's like one of those Chinese ideogram tattoos that don't mean what you think it means.
Yeah.
It's not, well, it's not dirty in English. I guess that's an advantage.
So Salazar was wondering if we were talking drugs again. We ended up in a conversation about drugs on another show a while ago, and they were wondering if that's where this was leading. No, I don't think so. But that's fascinating. Yeah, Keeman was just saying she likes how you use the grids on your work.
Oh, that's good. Well, I hope people emulate this. And, as I said, I have more experience using the printed out versions. Although, I've used these on digital art as well. I guess there's no reason not to use these square divisions to make these windows.
That's really cool.
And probably if I were not trying to do this as quickly as possible, I would, draw the lines behind the figures and then erase them, or maybe even do the figures on an upper layer.
Yeah.
But, let's see if I can. See if I can get rid of those background lines.
Curve.
Okay.
Yay.
Yep. And now what I haven't done is I haven't made any provision for dialogue.
That was mentioned earlier in the chats. Like one of the advantages of kind of working the dialogue first is you have a lot of space for dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But
any sane artist now would probably write out the dialogue beforehand and work the drawing around it. But I'm not every artist.
Well, I would also say for demo purposes, I think this functions, That's it's kind of cool to see the grid in context and being used. It's like a good reminder, I think.
I'm emulating Winsor McKay here.
So one of the things I love about McKay and a lot of artists around that era is how kind of boundless they were with the medium.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of before the conventions were set, they kind of created their own. And
yes,
I love the freedom era of cartooning.
Well, McKay, I mean, when you look at McKay, you're looking at very much the same kind of visual language that you see in early silent film. You see proscenium presentation, you see full figures. Somebody else that you see that in, he's not very much like McKay, but I think he has a similar kind of theatrical style, is Edward Gorey.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you think about Edward Gorey, I mean, he certainly didn't trouble himself with correct perspective. But he was always very meticulous about showing figures, showing full figures.
Yeah.
You almost never see close-ups. Sometimes you see characters, cut off at the waist or the shoulders, but he tends to be very consistent. He tends, not to use close-up views when he can. Let me switch this to grayscale.
Yeah, I think it's almost theatrical in its approach, right? Where it's like it's more approaching it like theater as opposed to film. You know?
Or television, and
Yeah.
that's what I notice with a lot of cartoonists. I mean, and not even young cartoonists, but just cartoonists maybe who've grown up since the advent of television, is that's where their visual language comes from. I wonder if that'll change now that so many young artists are growing up on video games, where there's so much more emphasis on the environment, not so much on closing in on characters and reading their faces.
That is actually a really interesting thing. Or like, will we just start seeing a ton of comics that are just fully isometric?
I'd love that. I love the look of isometric art. I've done a couple of comics myself in isometric. It's it's very rigorous. I mean, you can't really cheat. There's like nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I guess you can get in closer on your characters, but you can't really ignore the environment around them or cordon it off as a background. You have to consider a space and the characters moving within the space, not moving in front of a backdrop.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. I don't really need heavy outlines, but I think this drawing's going to look better with them. And I'm not changing the size of my brush. I'm just bearing down harder, which is what I do with my pen too. It wouldn't surprise me if that's how McKay got his heavy outlines rather than switching his nib.
Yeah.
Because I know he worked really quickly, like he worked insanely quickly. Like he could do a Little Nemo Sunday page in an afternoon, and he would do like 2 or 3 strips a day at his height.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, he didn't have television to distract him, or his phone. They had to crank their phones back then.
One of my favorite quotes is by William Randolph Hearst when he was kind of bragging about Winsor McKay. Mm-hmm. I think he said with so many colors that it makes a lead pipe look like a rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like that era of cartoonist. It's insane. Like one of my heroes is George Harriman. And I always think it's cool that, like, I mean, it's sad, but it's also very cool that, like, he had his last week of strips penciled where he was found dead. He had just like was so into his comic that he had created the whole next week's strips.
Well, he wasn't. I mean, did he know he was dying?
Probably not. But I just feel like if you're going to go out as a cartoonist, that's the way to go, is all I'm saying.
Well, and gosh, didn't Charles Schultz die within a year after retiring?
I thought it was less than that. I don't think this is true, but I remember maybe it wasn't Schultz, but I thought I heard that he died at his drawing board, but I think that's an exaggeration. But I thought
he had stopped doing Peanuts like a year or so.
Did he? Okay.
Before he died.
I thought
he didn't live long after that.
Right.
I just saw I just saw an episode of Documentary Now
Oh, I know.
where
Those are so
they
good.
did it was kind of pointless. They did a parody of the Bill Watterson documentary where Fred Armisen is obsessed with Gary Larson and is trying to track him down and get an interview. And I don't know why it's necessarily more laughable that anybody would be obsessed with Gary Larson than they would with Bill Watterson.
Well, Gary Larson's not a recluse, though, is he? Or is he?
Actually, I don't know. They make him out to be in this story, but of course, it's supposed to be humorous.
So
But
is that one on Netflix yet?
yeah, he he's like Bill Watterson in that he had a very popular strip and he kind of walked away at the height of his popularity.
Yeah.
Him and Burke breathed it, except he kept coming back
With different, you came back with like Outland and.
I feel like Watterson is an exception in the sense that he just kind of stopped at his peak and didn't burn it out at all.
Well, he's also an exception because how he could turn away that much money is just beyond me from licensing his stuff. I mean, I had so much integrity for that, but on the same point, it's like I kind of would have liked to have some Calvin merch, and I couldn't turn away that kind of money. There's no way.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if
Or am I against it? But I still admire him for that.
yeah, I don't know if that fits my morality either because I think I'd just take the money, but I admire the hell out of it. I love it.
I mean, I would draw. I mean, I would probably draw the line at like real kitschy stuff or just junk, but I think there's a middle ground.
I'm really digging this demo. It's really
it's turning out better. I mean, ever since I flattened the layers and went to grayscale, suddenly I'm not lagging anymore. So, I'm learning learning as I'm going. So this isn't turning out too badly, but I am more comfortable doing this on paper. And probably if I were doing this, with an intention of seeing it published, I might do this stage digitally, print it out, in a faint color, and ink it in paper.
Yeah. Do you find that are you quicker inking by hand? I might have asked you this the last time we had you on, but I repeat myself a lot too. But do you find it quicker to kind of ink by hand?
Yeah, I think I do. Well, when I did a 24-hour comic digitally, I told you that I managed to only get 17 pages done in 24 hours.
That's so funny to me that's only. That's a lot to me. But yeah, that's something I've found too. I actually figured that out like freelancing because I was realizing like a lot of like I'll do some freelance digital, but a lot of the time I just do my inks by hand because it's just like the speed and also the feel. Even with like a Cintiq, it just doesn't have the same give,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there are compensations. It's easy to repeat things.
Yeah.
I did an all digital project like 2 years ago. A graphic novel called "Are You Being Watched?" Which had me and Mug in it, but it wasn't about perspective. And I found that I saved a lot of time repeating backgrounds, and also I built up a library of poses. As the story went on, there were 3 main characters, and I was able to just save poses from previous pages and paste them in, and either keep them as is, or alter them slightly, and not have to draw things from scratch each time. And it saved me some time and gave me nice, consistent results. And I was doing model sheets and all that kind of stuff, which I suppose you can do on paper too, but it's just, so seamless. Taking those elements and reusing them.
Yeah, I also like the ability to, like, if I sketch out a head too big, I can just resize it. That's pretty cool. Or if I like the thing you were talking about with life drawing, where it's like if I start with a hand that's too small or something, I can just grab it and go whoop,
Oh yeah.
So there's definitely advantages, but I don't know. Scott, are you ever gonna switch to just full digital inking? I mean, I know you've played with it and done it.
I just did a video today where I did the whole thing. I did digital inking on it. And I don't know. My thing before was like, I was always like, I think I can ink quicker traditionally, because I always watch people who inking digital, and they'll do like a swipe and they don't like it, and then they'll undo, and they'll do that line 2 or 3 or 4 or more times before they get it the way they want. I'm like, well, when I'm inking traditionally, when I lay down the line, that's it. That's the line.
Yeah.
But I don't know. In Clip Studio, I've been using that G pen. It's pretty nice. I definitely, like, for my comic, I'm definitely gonna pencil the next comic digitally, because I know I can save time. But in order to make it look like the rest of the comics in the series, I'll probably still ink it traditionally. But then who knows with whatever project I do after that? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's something that scares me a bit, because I'm close to finished on mine.
So I've converted this to bitmap and saved it. I did not put a header on it. I'm not sure. I suppose I could, or I could just call it done. I think I'll call it done. I don't feel like lettering right now.
As far as the perspective goes, I mean, it's drawing more detail in the trees isn't going to get any point of the perspective across. So I think,
yeah. Although, it would look better with more detail in the trees, but of
course. You can always finish it later too, when you're not having to stream it and not worry about that.
I was hoping that I could save the video from this and speed it up and do another video, because it's I had some problems with it, but it's nice, clean results, which I've had a hard time getting shooting me drawing on paper. Like, the light levels keep flickering.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I've had the same.
If you speed it up, you're not going to notice any lag, so that might work.
Yeah, the lag is gone.
That was incredible though, and that was really cool to see. And like I said, it puts the grid in context, because if we just look at the grid itself without the context of that, seeing it in action, I think really helps someone be able to see how to utilize it.
Yeah, now when I did my first 24-hour comic way back, what was it, 2004? I was terrified of just like of being lost. So what I did was I printed out 24 pages of perspective grids, very much like that, just faint blue, because I figured having some kind of start, having those those columns, that cubic lattice, gave me something to hold on to, rather than that just blank piece of paper. Kind of like my character who was climbing a building and needed something to grapple onto.
I love it. Well, thank you, David. It's been really cool having you on. It's
Thank
always
you.
fun, always a pleasure talking to you. And I would recommend anybody who's still in the chats, which we have a pretty active chat right now. We've shown a few comments, but there's been a lot of people in our community really enjoyed this. So the main thing I'd recommend for everybody out there is like go to David's Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to let everybody know where that is, or should we?
It's on Patreon. Actually, I can find my Patreon, but it has some huge long address. So it's I think it's user. But you can just search for me on Patreon. There we are. It's user. But see, that's what my page looks like. That's my name, David Chelsea. And if you're intrigued by the perspective grid, the book to get is Extreme Perspective, which is a sequel to my original book, Perspective, and it gets into some esoteric stuff. It gets into curvilinear perspective. It gets into isometric and other kind of paraline drawing systems. It deals with reflections and shadows, just a lot of stuff that is kind of the second chapter. I kept the basic stuff in the first book, so that's the one you would start with if you want to learn perspective. If you want to improve on basic perspective skills, Extreme Perspective is good, but I think it's worth picking up just for the disc of perspective grids that you can either work over digitally or print onto paper and do drawings like I have been doing.
Awesome. So so I recommend both, and it's just been really cool. Also, read David's comics as well. Like the cool thing about the perspective books too is they're written as a comic, so they're really intuitive and easy to follow. But also, I'd recommend just check out all of David's stuff because it's all excellent stuff.
Thank you so much.
And we didn't really get to touch on like storyboarding or anything like that. So
and I was going to show you. The end titles that I'm working on for a local independent film that's probably going to premiere in December. I'm in the middle of working on some digital art that I'm going to animate in After Effects, and it's going to be probably a sequence thanking all the crowdsource donors for this film.
Awesome.
Which is called Earthlings, and it's directed by Steve Doughton.
That's rad. And we should have you back on too, just to at some point in the future to have you talk storyboarding, because I've only delved in that maybe for like 4 or 5 commercials, and the first time I felt like I was cheating. Like it's a weird but intimidating and interesting, and at the same time like just very unique line of work, and can be a really lucrative way for illustrators who have like a strong understanding of like perspective to kind of make a living, and not only that, to participate in this like creation of film and stuff. So I think that would be a really cool thing to have you back on for. In the meantime, you're on my channel. You know where to find me. So if you haven't yet, hit subscribe and hit the little bell so that it notifies you when we're about to go live. And we already mentioned go to David's Patreon, but David, do you want to let everybody know where to find your work and check out your art? All that cool stuff. I'll just let them know. dchelsea.com. So
did he get booted off?
Did he?
I don't see him.
I think he might have.
He might have got booted off.
Oh no. Well, I would recommend go to dchelsea.com. Hopefully he can get back on before we wrap.
I hope I didn't boot them off because I was screen sharing, but I don't think I clicked them off.
I'm just letting him know, and we'll give him. Well, anyhow, so hopefully it's sad because we were just about to wrap, but basically, definitely check out David's work. It was a pleasure having him on, and Scott. Often our channel gets kind of confusing,
Right.
kind of back and forth between my channel and your channel, and how can people kind of keep track of that? Before that, though, like if I need assets or cool stuff for my comics, where can I find those?
Yeah, so let me share my screen here, I think. Okay, see that? So this is design cuts right here. Yeah, if you go there right, it's like 1 day left to get this sale price. It's 56% off right now for the next, I think, like 24 hours. Let me click on this. We'll see what it says. We'll get this live feed. Come on. Oh, I'm clicking on the screen. I'm clicking on the wrong thing. I'm trying to click on the StreamYard screen. Come on, here. Why isn't this working? Okay, here we go. So there's a little timer here. So 1 day, 0 hours and 46 minutes and 23 seconds. So that's what you got if you want to get it at this special price. And I know, like I said, I know Robert, I think Robert got one, and I don't know if Ronnie's still in the chat, but he got one. But yeah, a lot of people were telling me, I'm not going to remember if Salazar said he got one or not, but they're there. It's there if you want to pick up one. But basically, it's a digital kit for creating comics, pretty much everything you need. And yeah, it's got a 5-star rating, and they just not that everything that's popular is good, but this is good, and right now it is trending on Design Cuts. So definitely go there if you want to get that for that price. Otherwise, it's going to go up. Let's see. Let me see. Can we click on David here? Can we get him back on real quick?
It's saying device not connected, so I'm guessing there's an audio issue or something. But bums me out because David's such a great dude for showing up.
So yeah, like Josh was talking about the Artcasters. If you want to, we switch back and forth from Josh's channel to my channel, and typically on Thursday nights. But you know, who knows? Sometimes we might have to do it on a different day. So if you want to know exactly when we're going to go on and everything, the best thing to do is to join our mailing list, and there should be a link in the description of this video. We don't spam you or anything like that. Just usually 30 minutes ahead of time, we'll just send out like a little, you know, thing saying what the show, who's going to be on the show, when it's going to be, and with a link to where the show is on YouTube, and so you can check it out and get in the chat and all that stuff. So yeah, that's something you should do if you want to be in the know. Boy, you laugh.
Well, so I guess we're gonna have to wrap, which totally stinks because I really I would like to say thanks, but anyhow, we'll still say it now. Just thanks, David, again for showing up and for giving us that awesome tutorial and sharing your wisdom and stuff. We will see you guys next week, and it should be fun. So make sure you follow what Scott said. You know, subscribe to that mailing list. Go to David's Patreon, patreon.com. Just look for David Chelsea, and you won't regret it. All right, we will see you guys next week.
Later.
And that laugh.